And welcome to Bury Our Bones With, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies and television. As always, I am your host Ryan Etherington, and I'm joined once again by the hollow man to my hollow brain, the always entertaining Jimmy Murphy. In today's episode, we go on a mystery-laden tour to a cabin in the woods, make sure the VCR is all plugged in, and remember to make a copy before we leave. So join us as we bury our bones with Hideo Nakata's 1998 cult Japanese horror, Ring. I'm David Heathbrow, Ghost Finder. Now, there are many haunted places up and down the country that if I were to sit here and list them all, by the time I was finished, I'd be a ghost. No, that's just a little joke, although I hasten to add that you should only joke about the forces of evil in the presence of a professional. I once knew a bloke who said that he didn't believe in the supernatural, and the next day he lost his car keys and his dog bit him. Now, you tell me that's not a sign of Beelzebub. But back to business. What I specialise in is determining if there is a presence within your home or office, but office do charge business rates. You and your husband are not trained to know if the fuse blowing on the kettle is a sign of faulty electrics or a message from Satan. I am. I graduated top of my class on the 2-day intensive course at the Lancashire School of the Macabre. For just a snip at £24.97, I will enter your house and check for any unwarranted paranormal. For specialist services, an overnight stay may be required, in which case you must provide adequate catering such as toad in the hole, peas and blancmange to finish. Unfortunately, I'm unable to give a specific price for this, as Dancing with the Devil is not only dangerous, but difficult to quote. That's David Heathbrow, Ghost Finder. That's misquoted on BBC BAFTA-winning documentary Debunking Heathbrow. Court case pending. That's David Heathbrow. Find me on CFAX, not the Yellow Pages. So when was the first time you saw...
Gotcha. Surgeon.
I always try and catch you off guard, don't I?
So well, first of all, right before we start, it's October.
It is October.
So that can mean only one thing.
Does that mean it's horror month?
It's horror month. Okay. It's Halloween, baby.
Yes.
I'm going to do the whole show like this. It's Halloween. Yeah, so it's horror month. So two horror movies.
2 horror movies to come this month. Yeah. So I can already hear the people's anticipation for these. I have to say, probably horror is my favourite genre, I would say.
I think I would.
It's always the go-to for me.
Yeah. Me and my wife used to watch. It's what we watch the most. We watch horror movies on Valentine's Day. We watch horror movies like at any given occasion. It's your first stop, isn't it?
That's because you're a classy type of people. That's why.
What it is, man.
So horror is definitely probably my favourite genre. So as we just said, we are focusing on the 1998 J horror classic Ring. Obviously that mean talking a little bit about the US remake and the sequels. So when was the first time you saw this, if you can remember?
Definitely early noughties for sure. Everyone I know was talking about it. It sort of came off there was a real resurgence in I guess the Western appreciation of Japanese cinema around the noughties. Like Battle Royale had come out, which I think is like late 90s if I remember correctly. I think it's before The Ring and that, but it's there was a lot of buzz around Battle Royale. And then people started talking about The Ring a lot. I mean, The Ring's like, what, 97?
98.
98.
You should have listened to the intro.
I was miles away.
I could tell.
So 98. So and the remake's what, 2000 and what?
2002 is the US remake.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a big buzz about it. A lot of my friends were talking about it. I was a little bit like, I thought Battle Royale was all right. I don't quite think it was as good as everyone was making out. Maybe I'll have to go back and revisit that as well.
I feel like that's a concept film more than anything. Yeah. It's got an interesting premise.
Yeah, exactly.
It has obviously got some quite heavy subtext.
Well, it's essentially the Hunger Games. Right?
Yeah, it was the Hunger Games before the Hunger Games.
That's right. That's what I thought when Hunger Games first came out. I thought, it's Battle Royale. But it's been so long since I've seen Battle Royale. I'm not sure. So anyway, everyone I know was talking about The Ring. The remake hadn't come out, and I was round my friend's house and we watched it, and I was impressed by it. It's a good movie. You know, I could see why people were really into it. The concept, as we're talking about concepts and movies of this movie, it's a pretty good one. It's your standard horror tropes, really, when you think about it. It's like a cursed object, you know what I mean, that will bring those who come into contact with it death in this case. But but the fact that in this version of that story is a videotape, it's kind of it lends itself, because it's a visual medium film, and the tape itself lends itself to the film really well. I thought, you know. What about yourself? When did you first?
So I think I saw the snippets of the Japanese version. I think it might have been late one night when I shouldn't have been up on Channel 4, and I don't think I watched it for long. So this would have been probably around the 2002 remake time. That's the only reason I can really think of it being on Channel 4. Because
Channel 4 used to have a pretty good pedigree of films that they would
for those who are listening in other countries, Channel 4 is one of the 4 main stations in the UK. It's the 4th one.
But they had Film 4 as well for a while.
Yeah,
they were heavily involved in like British movie making throughout most of the 90s.
Yeah, had some real good kind of, again, those horrors that aren't necessarily the mainstream. I can remember snippets of it. Again, images more than anything, because I didn't watch it for long, because I would have been about 10, 11 at the time, so not really at the age where I should be watching horrors, and it terrified me. It's, again, that image of what is Samara in the US remake, and is... Let's just have a look. I can't think of the name of the... let's have a look. Sadako or Sadako in the Japanese version. And then I think it would have been a few years later, I watched the US remake, and then that kind of got me into, this is based on that Japanese film that I vaguely remember. Let's go and check that out. And since that point, really, it's always been one of those, that's a really good film to return to. It's really a great concept. It's got some brilliant visuals in both, to be fair. And it's always one that I always like to have in the collection and just go, should we stick that one on? So that was kind of my first footsteps into J-horror, shall we say, and then since that point it's kind of gone a bit further into that.
Yeah, it is visually stunning. There's something about it. It has a like low budget feel to it, but it's hard for you to put your finger on, because we're a Western audience, and it's made primarily for a Japanese audience, but because it already feels removed from you when you're watching it, because there's a language barrier there, and I guess cultural differences and stuff like that are all at play. And there's a weird feeling I get from watching the original that you cannot replicate in the westernized version, in the Hollywood version of it, almost feels like I'm watching a found cassette. It's like beautifully shot. It's not that it looks cheap. It's not that it looks like iffy or badly done at all, but it feels like something that has been discovered. The whole film feels like what's this weird art house foreign film? Oh, it's about this really weird subject about you watch a video and then you have 7 days to live, sort of thing. That overall tone of it just feels like this film. The film I'm watching may have come from hell itself. You know what I mean? That's
the beauty of the concept, is that at the time it would have been out, VHS was still quite prevalent.
Yeah.
And even DVD to some extent can still lend itself to the same thing, whereby the story is about a cursed videotape. Now, if you've brought the film on videotape, the idea of putting in a film about a cursed videotape in the VCR, even for the most cynical of people watching horror films, there must be an element going, what if this is the cursed videotape? And that's what lends itself so well to, obviously in the cinema it would have been perceived in a particular way, but it then has that kind of knock-on effect when it goes for home video release. Yeah,
or especially in this country, you wouldn't have seen... it's just called Ring, the original. It's called Ring. It's just called Ring.
And interesting fact...
You wouldn't have seen that in the cinema in this country. Maybe some art house cinema, but it wouldn't have been on at your View, your Warner Brothers and that. Not that you would have even really noticed it, you know. How many people go watch films with subtitles and such? Like, maybe more so now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. If someone said, there's this amazing Japanese, Indonesian, whatever horror out the cinema, it's got a big buzz about it. I think because of The Ring, or Ring, you know, and Grudge, and The Grudge and all those movies, I think you'd be more likely to find an audience for a movie like that being released. Whereas I'm not sure you would have in like late 90s, you know.
I totally agree with that. And funny enough, we say about cinema releases, just as we're thinking about recording this episode, I get a notification from my local theatre, and they're doing for October, for Horror Month, a series of horror films on at the cinema, and one of them is Ring. You know, and I thought that's such a cool thing. And actually, I don't often go and see old films at the cinema, but I think I might have a look at going to see it in the cinema just to get that, you know, that experience of seeing it in the cinema. One thing I will say, obviously, it's called Ring in the Japanese version. If you were to look on IMDb, shall we say, you will notice it says Ringu, so it has a U on the end. Interesting fact about that is that word doesn't exist. It's not a word. It was created because the literal translation of the Japanese language to this has to have a vowel on the end. So it had Ring, and it was like, it has to have a vowel on the end, and somebody put on the IMDb listing when it first started a U on the end, so it became Ringu. And of course it's now spurred on to now you hear people refer to it as Ringu, and it just doesn't mean anything at all.
It was never called that.
It's really quite interesting. It's interesting because it came at a really important time for Japanese cinema, really, because I think the films before that were much more based in I suppose what you would call shock horror and sort of gore and violence.
Body horror.
I mean, you've got films like Ichi the Killer and as you mentioned, Battle Royale and
Tetsuo Iron Man.
Exactly. Like that, much more, shall we say, physical, visceral kind of horror. And this was a real kind of like step back into those old-fashioned kind of ghost stories and urban legends and myths and fables. And I think that's probably why it had such a good kind of turnout when it was released, because it wasn't the norm in Japan. Obviously, in the Western cinema, we've always kind of had those ghost stories or similar kind of paranormal, supernatural style cinema. But for Japan, they hadn't really had that. It was kind of an old thing. It was kind of based in Japanese theatre,
right?
In kabuki theatre, and they kind of, so it was a real kind of, at the same time as being quite modern and innovative, it was also a real kind of big harken back to the old kind of stories that would have been told in your traditional Japanese theatres.
It's often the case, though, isn't it? It's like something that in cinema that will push the boundaries forward has one foot firmly in an almost forgotten genre sometimes. It'll be like, this is an update on that story or that type of movie. What we did is we just gave them lightsabers. Do you know what I mean? It's like, but if you look at it, it's very, it's a samurai movie.
There's an argument for Harry Potter just being Star Wars but with magic, you know. And I think that's quite a cyclical thing where we've done loads of stories on that. Now they're not as popular anymore, and then they go away and then they come back, Obviously we've touched upon it in previous episodes where like comic book films didn't really exist in the 60s and 70s. They kind of just starting to come towards the latter stages.
Some excellently ropey Spider-Man movies from I think the 70s that I grew up with as a kid.
Let's
say
I will mainstream
love.
Big budget.
I know what you mean. Yeah, they weren't particularly bankable.
Yeah, and even things like Superman kind of came in, and they've kind of been the new Western where it's massive. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, it's westerns. And now you don't see westerns at all, really.
Probably 30s, isn't it?
Probably,
30s, 40s,
even
50s,
far back as
60s,
that.
Yeah.
And now you don't see westerns that much in the mainstream. They're very few and far between. And comic books are starting to get to that point where I think people are...
The tipping point.
They're now
They've
going...
definitely peaked,
There's so many.
Yeah.
We're getting a bit bored of this. And so things that, I think we're just on that, as you say, on that tipping point.
Yeah.
And Ring started a whole host of these. It was the kind of the catalyst for a return to these kind of genres. Obviously, you have your Ring trilogy. You have Ring. I mean, in doing research, you realise how many Ring films there are. There are loads and loads and loads.
Right.
A lot of people would just think, it's the Japanese trilogy and then the 2 or 3 US remakes.
Yeah. My box set's got 4 discs in it.
Yeah, I think one special features.
Is that right?
Yeah, but there are a whole host. I haven't looked
at it properly yet.
Obviously, I think in this country and in Western countries, we probably don't have as much exposure to them. But we'll get into some of the others a little bit later on. But yeah, it started that trend where very shortly afterwards you had the Ju-on, the Grudge series. You had things like A Tale of Two Sisters. You had Dark Water. You had Pulse. These ghost stories or these very old school stories that kind of really became quite prominent in J-horror. And obviously, because of that success, Hollywood kind of went, we can bank upon this. There's money to be made here. And they brought up the rights to a whole host of Japanese films and just then started doing remakes.
Yeah.
And
it's that tale as old as time.
It is, yeah.
Like Hollywood is obviously, especially for us in the West, is held up as the gold standard of movie making. It's a long history of just stealing bits. French expressionism, German expressionism, Japanese cinema. They just take all the bits they want and then repackage it for a Western audience.
Yeah, and you usually when we hear about remakes of old stuff, I'm kind of a bit like, do we really need to see that? Does that really need to be? Who is that for? I think when it's foreign language films, I actually do kind of understand why it happens, because listening to a film and not understanding anything and having to read subtitles is not for everyone. And so I have a lot more sympathy for it being done in that way. When it's just, this film hasn't, we can make some money out of this remake, let's do that. Whereas...
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to get snobbish about these things. You should just watch the original. It's like, it's reasonable to say, as an average moviegoer, I don't really like watching movies with subtitles. It doesn't necessarily make you a moron or uncultured or unappreciative of good cinema. It's reasonable. You know what I mean? So when they remake something specifically for a Western audience, there's no real shame in it. The shame is usually because it's very rarely worth doing, or at least not as good as the original. But not everyone appreciates cinema the way someone like you or I would. Whereas if you didn't already know, like you're saying, like you come across the American version, you're like, I'm going to have to go check out the original. It's because you have an interest in it, and reading subtitles doesn't bother you. Some people don't want to do that when they watch movies. Some people just want to go to the cinema and eat popcorn. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Something to have on in the background.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah.
I think
so.
Actually,
I can see why Hollywood remake. Plus, it's money. You know what I mean? But it's there's no real shame, I don't think, in them saying that film's created a lot of buzz. I think we could do something with it. And then acquiring the rights to it and remaking it, that's legitimate. It's been legitimate since cinema was born. I mean, Dracula, the first ever horror movie, there was simultaneously a Spanish spoken word version filmed at night on the same set of the original Dracula. So these things, there's always been a give and take between these things. To just pinch the concept and make a Ring adjacent-esque type movie is where I would have a problem with it. But to acquire intellectual property legally and remake it seems reasonable to me. I mean, obviously, it's really not going to be much of a shock to people listening. I think the original's much better than the remake, but I don't think the remake's a bad film.
I think they're two totally different films. I properly saw the US remake first and thought it was really good. And then I saw the Japanese original, and I appreciate them both in different aspects, because to me, yes, okay, the story is the same, but they're not really the same film. There's so much difference in them other than just the story. I'm sure we'll probably get into the differences as we go along, but it is those interesting choices. I watched them both yesterday, and I watched them in the order they were made. I watched the original first, then watched the American, and I did wonder whether I should have watched it the other way around, but I'm like, no, that's the order it came out in. And it was interesting to see some of those changes they made that were clearly made for Western sensibilities. There's nothing wrong with that. You are making a film for Western sensibilities, but it's just interesting, like we don't think a Western audience will accept that the father of a child's psychic, but they will definitely accept a weird child being psychic. You know what I mean? And I'm watching, I'm like, because you're watching, well, why would you change that? And you're like, audiences wouldn't accept it. They would accept the weird child. Do you know what I mean? Because we've seen that before. To have like, oh, here's my ex-boyfriend or my ex-partner, the father of my child, who also just happens to be psychic. I can see that not sitting well with a Western audience. You know what I mean? Because I'd watched the original version first, it did annoy me a little bit. Like I said, I watched them. I was like, you didn't have to do that, but I know why they did ruining
it.
The film.
Yeah, you do have to have an openness when you're watching a remake to not just demand it's the same film but in English. Otherwise, there really would be no point in making it. You know, I'm sorry you don't like reading subtitles. Have you seen the dubbed version? You know, like it's that you have to change it slightly. You have to change it, otherwise what's the point in making it? You know?
Absolutely. I think there are things that need to be changed because culturally they don't mean the same thing, and as you say, it would jar with a Western audience.
Yeah, she threw herself into a volcano in Ohio.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just cropped up on it. It's only been there a week. The Ohio Valley volcano. I think it'd be really interesting to actually, if we do have any Japanese listeners or anybody who comes from that culture to see what they think about the US remake, because one of the things that I love about the Japanese original is those cultural things, because they're not culturally the same for me. That intrigues me. I think that gives it a sense of personality that sets it out from anything else I'd really seen.
Yeah. So everything about it is, at the risk of sounding redundant, foreign to to you. Maybe not foreign to you. I was going to say foreign to your sensibilities, but just foreign to you in all the right ways. And that really helps. That plays into when you're watching a supernatural thriller horror movie where things are off kilter and weird. It only helps to pile on that everything you're watching is from a different culture. It all feels, even the normal stuff is different, and I don't want to say weird, but just different to you as a person. And it helps, that whole feeling of the film has this otherness about it. And they try to replicate it in the American version. Like, it's very well made. It's they drain all the colour out of it, and they try to make it very other-esque. It has this sort of detached feeling throughout. The whole film is drained of colour and detached, you know what I mean? But it doesn't have the same effect. We've seen American movies in America and did it a million times. One of the changes they made that really stood out to me is the fact that Naomi Watts' character had to be a bit of an asshole at the beginning of the film, because they decided they needed to give her a character arc that isn't in the original. Do you know what I mean?
Of the things
she starts off over here, and by the end of it, she's quite reasonable, which is such a Western thing to do. She's a career woman. She must be a bit of an arsehole. I don't think that would happen now in a film.
No, it does
it's
seem
a very early. I mean, was this 22, 21 years old now?
Yeah, 21 years ago. It does feel like a very noughties thing to do. But one of the things that I noted down when I was watching the US remake was that everybody has a character. Like, everybody has an element of character. Like, the guy at the cabin he has a bit of an awkwardness and a bit of a strangeness about it.
I think it's that with that red herring when you're watching it, where you think, oh, is it something to do with that person? Is he the key? The weirdo who owns the log cabin. It's that sort of red herring thing in horror movies.
Even the guy who's at the I was about to say mental hospital. It's not the right word to use, but at the hospital where they've got the videotapes. Even he's a bit of a character. It's like they have to give every single person in the film a character, and I think sometimes that can go a little bit overboard, because when you're in it for one scene, you don't really need that. It's just it's just brain candy. It's just it's white noise.
You can overlayer it, can't you?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So we've spoken a little bit about it, and we've mentioned the story. So let's just, for those who haven't seen either version of the film, here's a brief rundown of the plot. So after the death of her cousin Tomoko, reporter Raiko hears stories of a videotape that kills everyone who sees it exactly 1 week after viewing. At first she discounts the rumours, but when she learns that Tomoko's friend, who watched the video with her, died at exactly the same time, she begins to investigate. After viewing the tape herself, strange things start happening, and so she teams up with her ex-husband to try and stop the death clock that has once again begun ticking.
Was that from the Japanese?
That's from the Japanese.
I was going to say, that sounds much more like the original.
Yeah, and to be fair, the US version is virtually the same story. Obviously, there's little intricacies and little bits that are slightly different, but essentially it's the same thing. A cursed videotape that kills you 1 week after viewing it, and you watch it, and then she's got to find a way to stop the curse. And, there's great narrative tools that they use in it. Like, it would be so easy for it to just be, you watch this videotape and then you die, but they bring in the element of a phone ringing. The moment you've watched it, the phone rings. So it's different in the American one to the original, because am I right? If I remember it correctly, the phone only rings in the cabin in the original,
whereas in the American one, it keeps ringing her answer machine. So it sounds funnier than it is.
Hello, it's the curse. Can you pick up, please? Because I've got to let you know that you're going to die in a week.
Yeah. Are you call screening?
I know you're there. I can hear you.
So this, and then there's the blurry. I'd forgotten about the blurry photos part as well, which is another lovely little touch. It's like you've got a curse on you now. So here's a visual representation of how doomed you are going to be. You know what I mean? And it's lovely little narrative tools like that they put in. You know, because it'd be so easy to just. Oh, you're cursed, and now we're off. But it's just little bits like that, which I thought was a really nice touch. It was shows like a well-crafted screenplay. We can add a little bit more weirdness in here, like a little bit more tension. Like in the American version, he sees his face on a CCTV camera, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes,
I actually thought it was a good touch. You know what I mean?
I think the simplicity of the story is what makes it so appealing, is that it's very easy to get your head around, and so you commit to that story very, very quickly. You're not going, well, hang on a minute, how does that work, or what does that mean? It's very, okay, you watch it and you get a phone call and you're going to die in a week. That's, open as shut as it can be. And for the most part, the US remake followed that same simplicity, obviously adding in a few steps and a few different things and whatnot. So shall we go through the facts and the figures?
Yeah, man.
Let's have a look. Obviously, it's quite difficult to get the figures for the Japanese version, but the Japanese version had a budget of $1.2 million.
It's not a lot, really.
It was quite low. That is quite low budget for a mainstream film. It was the highest grossing horror movie in Japan at the time of its release, so it was really quite successful. Beyond that, there's not really much else. But the US remake, we've got a lot more information, obviously. So that had a budget of $48 million, which is about £38 million, 66 million in today's money. So obviously much much bigger budget. So you can do a lot more with more money. It made $15 million in its opening weekend. So again, that's a good portion and good return on your opening weekend. And overall in the US and Canada, it made 129 million. So you've doubled your budget and a bit more. And then worldwide, it was 249 million. So by all means, a success. It was very successful. And I think part of that is because it's a very good remake. It's unlike, I would probably say, a lot of the remakes that came afterwards. It's a very good homage to the original.
It's not bad. It's definitely not a bad movie. There's actually stuff they changed in there that I prefer. Actually, I really like the stuff with the horses. I thought that was a really nice
Some
touch.
really good imagery, isn't it?
Yeah. That stuff was really good. And like you can see why, like we were joking earlier, like, about throwing yourself into a volcano. It's not really going to work, is it? You know what I mean? But yeah, it's definitely not a bad movie. Like you say, it is almost a completely different movie, even though it's exactly the same. It's like comparing apples and oranges almost, It's got like you say, everyone in the remake, everyone is everyone is a trope essentially in the American version, but you can tell it's made. They were definitely trying to make a good film. It wasn't. I mean, obviously, studios are studios. We always say this, and bottom line is what they're interested in. But you can tell the people that made the movie were trying to make a really good movie. And I think if I'd seen it first, I would like it probably more than... It's not even that I don't like it. It's like sometimes throwing more money at something can improve it, and sometimes it can ruin it. And I actually think they walk the balance for the most part successfully. Obviously, they changed the video itself. I think the original tape in the original version is more eerie than the one that they remake it to. It's got that burning tree imagery and stuff, and it's a little bit too much for me. Felt a little bit like that. Felt a little ham-fisted, stuff like that. But it's not. It doesn't ruin the film. It doesn't take you out of the film. I think having watched them essentially back to back yesterday, I was hyper aware of the differences that they'd made and the choices they made. They're choices you have to make. You have to do something different. You've got $48 million. You know, I mean, it's going to be different. For the most part, they succeed, I would say, throughout the movie.
I think one of the best things you could probably say about it is it doesn't detract from the legacy of the original film. Sometimes you get remakes and they really do just become, you know, I'm thinking about the Hellraiser, you know, anything past 3, and even 2 and 3 weren't great.
Hellraiser, diminishing returns.
It's like all it does is just satirizes the whole genre, the whole franchise, and you go, I'm so bored of this now. It doesn't do that.
I've seen many of them since 3, to be honest. I love the first 3. I think they're quite good movies. You know what I mean? Even the third one.
So those were the figures. So let's go through the people who made the film. So obviously it was released. I say obviously, it's not obvious at all unless you've got it in front of you. But it was. I'm making a lot of assumptions about anybody listening to this, aren't I?
You got to assume.
Have you not got your fact sheets with you?
You got to assume they at least like the movie. Yeah. It might be obvious to them. I don't know.
So it was released on the 31st of January 1998.
Obviously,
it's going to be a running theme now.
Oh, you know me so well.
This is the Japanese original.
Obviously,
it was directed by Hideo Nakata. Obviously, it was the screenplay was written by Hiroshi Takahashi, but it was based on the book by Koji Suzuki.
I did not know it was based on a book.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of.
Do you know when the book was written?
Around about the same time, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
So it's produced by. I do apologise on any of these names.
You've been doing really well, man. I'm terrible at like pronouncing names. You know
Takashigi Ishii, Shinya Kawai, Takanori Sento, the producers. Then we have the composer is Kenji Kawai, and the cinematographer is Junichiro Hayashi.
I'm thoroughly impressed right now. I don't think I'm terrible. Has anyone heard me try to pronounce Ennio Morricone's name? I think I'm still doing it wrong. Ennio Morricone? Oh, let's not get into this again. As evidenced by what just happened when I was like, I've got it now. I've got it.
Finally, my love for Japanese wrestling is actually having a real world use right now.
Yeah.
It
was very impressive.
Again, if there's any Japanese listeners, they're probably going, that's not how you say that name. Who's that?
I reckon they'd give you like at least points for like
giving it a
effort,
go, and not, what I mean? and not saying even the character names are obviously Japanese, so can't get out there. So Hideo Nakata is probably the person who kind of rejuvenized Japanese horror. You know, he obviously done Ring and Ring and Ring 2. He also went on to do Dark Water as well, which also has a US remake with Jennifer Connelly.
Right, yeah.
So he definitely has he even directed the US remake of the US sequel of The Ring.
Did he really?
Yeah, he done The Ring 2, and it was essentially a remake of his second Ring.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Really interesting.
That is interesting. Now I'm going to have to spend the rest of today watching another two Ring movies back to back.
Yeah.
That's going to be fascinating.
What is really interesting about the Ring franchise as a whole is, as we mentioned, it's based on a book by Koji Suzuki, and that has gone very much more into the sci-fi genre. It's almost
Really?
it almost develops into kind of like the Matrix in some respects. I haven't read them. This is second-hand knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that much research for this, but yeah, that's kind of where it goes in that kind of thing. Interestingly, when Ring was made by a separate production company, separate directors, producers, etc., and obviously a separate cast, a sequel was made back to back. So they were supposed to release at the same time, and the idea was that they could piggyback off each other's success. So, you've seen Ring, great. Ring 2's already out because it was filmed at the same time.
Wow.
The problem is because it was a different production company. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's very much a even more lower budget, and just not as skillful in their creation of it.
Ring 2.
This is different from Ring 2.
Right.
Which is where it gets a little bit confusing. I think it's called Ryzen, I think is what it's called.
Right.
I could be getting that wrong because there are so many. It's become like this whole genre in Japanese cinema.
Interesting.
So yeah, and then Hideo
I can feel
Nakata.
myself getting tempted to go down a rabbit hole here. You know what I mean? I'm like, there goes the rest of my year.
Yes. So Hideo Nakata made the sequel, the Japanese, the one that probably most Western audiences have seen, Ring 2, and then Ring 0, which is the third in the trilogy, is a prequel of sorts. And unfortunately, they get kind of progressively worse. I mean, there's still a place for them. Ring 2, I think, it's not quite as logical. There's a lot more kind of going on, and not necessarily in a good way. But I still quite like it. But Ring 0 is a very different film. It takes place in a theatre. The idea is that Sadako, his mother, I think, again, I could be getting this wrong, it's really difficult to follow, is in the theatre, and she gets the role of this particular thing, and these weird things start happening, and that's where it starts to build that kind of where the story started, shall we say. And then obviously the US, you've got the Ring, you've got the Ring 2, which, as I said earlier, Hideo Nakata directed. Unsurprisingly, I should say, he said it was a very different experience of having to work in Hollywood compared to, he was quite surprised at how much the studio had an input. And then we have I can't remember the year of it, but the recent reboot, reimagining, whatever you want to call it,
there wasn't
Rings, which
Rings,
is
that's it.
I've seen it and cannot tell you a single thing that happened in it.
Right,
so that says a lot about how good that film is. So looking at the cast again, I apologise in advance on some of the names, but let's give it a go. So we've got Nanako Matsushima playing Raiko Akasawa. We have Hiroyuki Sanada playing Ryuji Takayama. We have Mike Nakatani versus Christ.
Wrestling.
I'm either watching wrestling or playing Tekken now. Miki Nakatani playing Mei Takano. Yuko Takeuchi playing Tomoko Oshii. And then we have Hitomi Sato playing Masami, and Ryo Inio playing Sadako Yamamura, which is the girl in the cursed videotape.
Right.
So I think probably for the US watchers, the most recognisable name is Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays the ex-husband, the father of the little boy, because he's done quite a lot in US cinema. He was in things like The Wolverine. He was recently in Bullet Train, which is a good film. He recently played Scorpion in the Mortal Kombat reboot. and he's been in Avengers Endgame, so he's a much more recognisable.
Yeah, the moment you see him, you go, it's him.
Yeah. And I think that, again, returning to it after all those years, because as I say, I can remember watching it at the time and not really knowing who he was, so it didn't really register. Now returning to it, I get an even bigger appreciation for it because I know some of his other work and quite like him as an actor. I think he's quite good. So, and obviously in the US remake, we have a whole host of names. We've got Naomi Watts, we've got Brian Cox. Now I can't think of any other names in the film.
It's funny though, whenever who's Brian Cox to you? Yeah, everyone now would know him as Succession, the dude from Succession.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's a
efficiently.
He's a accomplished actor of many decades. As is always the case with me when I watch these things these days, I see him and I just go, it's Daphne's dad from Frasier. Even though when he turned up in Frasier, Daphne love. Even though when he turned up in Frasier, I'm like, it's Brian Cox. Now he's Daphne's dad to me. But this film, the remake, has two people who are in Frasier. Her sister, Naomi Watts' his sister, that character, she's in a few episodes of Frasier as well. And then I was watching, I was like, oh, because I'd never seen her in anything else. I was like, oh, she plays a lawyer in Frasier. He dates her for a couple of episodes. You know? And it would have been around the same time, to be fair. And I'd forgotten Brian Cox was in it. Hannibal Lecter himself. And he turned up and I said, Daphne! You know, and if that split moment it takes you out of the film when you're watching it. Because I was like, there's two people from Frasier. And then I'm sitting there going, is there anyone else from Frasier in this film that I forgot? It's Kelsey Grammer.
You can make a drinking game out of that.
It's Niles, you know.
He plays one of the horses. Yeah. Brian Cox to me probably, it's very hard for me to imagine him as anything other than Logan Roy from Succession. Suppose a little bit probably before that was, I mean, he's been in so much that I can't even really remember much of what he's been in, which is a really odd thing to say.
Yeah, he's been around for so long though, hasn't he?
As you say, he played Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter, which is, again, I watched that not so long ago. I'm going off on a bit of tangent here, and I hadn't seen Manhunter up until a little while ago. And from everybody talking about, obviously, Brian Cox done Hannibal Lecter first, thinking that he had a much larger role in the film. And I know Anthony Hopkins doesn't have a massive role in Silence of the Lambs. It's only 9 to 10 minutes worth.
It's spread out in Silence of the Lambs.
You see him
he's consistently turning up in it.
That's right. Yeah, whereas Manhunter, he's in one scene and he's never seen again. Yeah. And it's almost like blink and you miss it. Almost to the point of like, what?
Yeah, Manhunter's interesting in more of a sort of origins sort of way. Would you go, oh, so like that character exists in a very small moment, and then when the writer of the books obviously went, I should do something with this Hannibal Lecter. He's pretty good. You know what I mean? This is where the money is. No, but you
almost know what I mean? A little bit like Frasier. That's what we call a full circle.
But yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, like when you could when you write something, I suppose, and you have a character that you go, oh, he'd be good for this narrative device. He'd be a good character to put in this. Then the person's like, I'm going to revisit that character. It's almost like I accidentally created this amazing character, but it's not really by accident, but it's like I can now see there's more potential in this character, and you get to the Silence of the Lambs. They say he's not in it a lot, but he's peppered it throughout the film, so he turns up a lot. So it feels like he's in that film a lot more than he is. And then obviously you get the sequels. You get Hannibal, which is Red Dragon, sorry, is essentially the remake of Manhunter and Hannibal some years later, which is like chock full of him. Yeah.
And are you ready for a seamless transition? You could almost say the same with the Sadako character or Samara in the remake, whereby what seems to have happened quite a lot, particularly with the Japanese chronology of films, in that character has gone on and gone in a whole host of different directions. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier about how many there are. I haven't got them all to hand, but I know there's over 10 different films that have that character. And one interesting one, which I think is definitely probably worth a viewing, which I haven't seen yet, but I think I probably will, is it. I can't remember what it's called because I can't remember the character from the other film, but it's essentially The Ring versus The Grudge.
Nice.
Which I think that sounds like it's like Alien versus Predator for J-horror.
For sure, man.
You know, there's been a Wii game made about Sadako.
Yeah.
Which I think, just whilst I say that, it's interesting that they've obviously... Well, I suppose it's not interesting because it makes total sense.
You want to hope it's
So I don't know
interesting.
why I'm mentioning it at all. But obviously they've obviously changed the name of that character from Sadako to Samara.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, because I saw the US one first, it's really hard to remember that it's not Samara, it's Sadako or Sadako. I don't know which one. I'm probably saying it wrong. So I have to, every time I say it, I'm like, oh no, it's wrong character.
Well, yeah, we're essentially talking about two movies at the same time, aren't we? So it's quite...
So I hope you can follow along, anybody listening.
At no point are we going to be able to call someone Kevin's mum. Or Brundlefly.
Yeah.
Flashback to previous episodes.
Yeah. So let's have a little bit of trivia. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to do the what has become a staple of Bury Our Bones with the, you know, potential castings and would-be castings. Obviously, because there probably are some, but I'm guessing. Well, I know that I probably wouldn't know half of the people that they nearly cast.
It's not going to be of much interest if you've never heard of the person.
Exactly. So let's start with, and again, this links in quite nicely to one of our future episodes.
Oh.
The eyebrows are being raised now. So the book that it was based on, of the same name by Koji Suzuki, got his inspiration for the novel from his favourite horror movie, Poltergeist.
Oh.
And watching Poltergeist and Ring in very quick succession, you can see that influence really, really clearly.
Yeah.
And not in that's blatantly ripped off of that. It's done in a way where it does something different with it. It's not just a blatant rip-off. It's going, I love that thing and I want to reference that in some way. I want to do a homage to that. But how can I make it different? And it's not just a blatant rip-off.
Yeah, I know it's exactly the same thing. It was really fascinating to me. Spoilers, we are doing Poltergeist next.
Dun, dun, dun.
Was obviously you like... Well, basically how it works is we pick a film each, and we do 2 a month. I'd pick one, you do another, right? And you said, I want to do Ring, and we discussed doing like both of the American and then you're like, what film do you want to do? I was like, well, it's Halloween month, so it's another horror. And I was watching them back to back yesterday, and I was watching them watch Poltergeist, and I was like, oh, there's similar threads here. I wonder how much of that was subconscious when I said Poltergeist, and how much of it is just pure coincidence. But I know exactly what you mean, because when I was watching Poltergeist after, I was like, oh, there's threads here that lean from one to the other. Obviously, Poltergeist is like 82, so yeah, that's interesting that he says it was one of my influences.
It's one of those things that once you know it's there, it's so obvious. But when you don't know it's there, it doesn't feel like, that's just blatantly that. You know, which I think means that you give it much more credibility. You give it a chance rather than just going, you know, because I think obviously when you watch films, it's what your thoughts are going into it, which often affects what you think about it after you've seen it. So, as I said earlier, based in Japanese ghost stories that were often performed in kabuki theatre, which is, anybody who's done any theatre, is quite a unique style of performance. It uses a lot of masks and face paint. Interestingly, for anybody who has ever been to the theatre or seen anything, or even in stage shows in general, whether that's music or ever, if you see, let's say, a curtain drop or a gauze drop, which is essentially a grate or a mesh, shall we say, is a gauze. Anytime you see that drop, that's called a kabuki drop, because that was made very, very prominent in kabuki theatre, and that's obviously how it's got its name. So, really interestingly, the 2001 UK DVD release back cover carries a disclaimer stating that the distributor accepts no responsibility for any injuries or fatalities that may occur during or after the viewing of this video cassette. And that's what I was saying earlier about the beauty of it is just there's that little question in the back of your mind when that film finishes, are you going to get a phone call?
Well, that's what's so good. Like I say, it's a cursed artifact movie, which you've seen in horror movies and monster movies and so on from the dawn of time. And what's so the genius part about making it a tape cassette is not only what you then get to do with it, like as you get through towards the end of the film, where it comes through the TV and all of that stuff, is you make it very tangible. Everyone has tape cassettes. Not everyone has an emulate, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is, whatever else it could be. Everyone has a tape cassette. Especially if you're watching this movie, you literally have a tape cassette. And then I didn't know they'd written on the back of it, I'm not taking responsibility for this. You know what I mean? It's a nice little touch. So yeah, it does have that. It's like it doesn't really make any real difference to the film or to the quality of the film. But it's just that nice little extra layer of, I say, ambiguity maybe, or so, a little bit of like, because we watch horror movies to be scared. Same reason you go on roller coasters, whatever. So you're open to it, and it's a supernatural horror film, you know. So it's otherworldly already, and it's tangible. They somehow managed to put, because it's in the tape, they managed to put that horror literally physically in your hands, you know what I mean? It's such a good touch. And then you get to be able to do all of those bits, the visual stuff there's a little bit more of the film towards the end that you haven't quite seen, and it's different. It's weird when you watch the American version versus the original. At different points in the American version, you see her starting to come out of the well, that end shot of the well, and it's not at all in the original. It's only at the very end, you know what I mean?
Tired of never having enough money to enjoy the things that you love? Always checking the time to make sure you're home before curfew? Constantly being nagged by mom and dad to get a job? Well, then look no further, because this summer, Camp Crystal Lake are looking for volunteers. This exciting summer camp will look great on the CV when you apply to college. Plus, you get to hang out with other teenagers looking to have fun in the New Jersey countryside. Applicants must be proficient in at least one of the following skills: running for prolonged periods, strong voice projection that can be heard from afar, resilience through challenging situations, good spatial awareness, or strong teamwork. If this sounds like you, then please send your applications to Mrs. Voorhees at Camp Crystal Lake, 1980, and please give a full list of details. Disclaimer, you might be expected to stay beyond the summer.
That brings us on very nicely to how the effect of Sadako coming out of the well was accomplished. So it only had one simple effect, apparently. So Hideo, the actress, who is a student of the Kabuki theatre, uses exaggerated motion and jerking movements to emphasise emotion. was heavily involved in the development of that character, and as a result, it was filmed with her walking backwards and the film run in reverse.
Right.
So the end result is her walking forwards with really quite unnatural, weird, jerky-looking movements.
It's amazing,
and it's
it's the thing that makes it unsettling. You've never seen her face. It's something that they change in the American version to its detriment. And they don't do the weird jerky movements in the American version to its detriment. And that I found that meltingly stupid.
If you can't pronounce the word, choose another one.
I couldn't believe they didn't do the movements. At one point in the American thing, instead of fast forwards almost, and she's here, then she's here. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you've done so well at not changing things for the sake of changing them. At that point, it genuinely gave me a bit of rage.
It definitely goes back to that thing that I know we speak a lot about in these podcasts, about the difference between like practical effects and CGI. Obviously, you know, we sit very much on the practical effects over CGI. But I think it's that, you know, it's such a more straightforward and simple approach.
It's way creepier.
And it creates such a better effect from doing that. And obviously they had a more budget with the remake, and obviously if you've got more budget you want to use it. But at some point I just wished somebody had said, if we don't need to do that with this, we can achieve a much better effect, much easier, much quicker, and much more cost efficient.
Or if you're going to change it, make it better, not worse. You know, it's really, it's like they threw it away at the end. When I was watching, I was like, oh, you like, 'cause it even has the annoying bit for me anyway, when she's talking to her psychic son. And she's like, it's all like, I saved her, it's fine. And he's like, well, she doesn't want to be saved, what are you doing? Which telegraphs what's about happening. Obviously we know it's coming, and sort of jump scares and all of that sort of stuff. You know the ending isn't the ending, you know there's more to come. Especially if you bought the DVD of the original version, literally has the end scene on the front cover. And that annoys me, because I'm like literally put on what is the money shot on the DVD cover. I'm like, so you must be sitting there going, well, like, she hasn't come out the telly yet. You know?
At some point that's gonna happen.
Because that was the great thing when I first watched it back in like I say, the early noughties. All of my friends were talking about it, so I watched it. You know. All of my friends who I trust, who are film buff kind of people, you know, but they didn't tell me that scene was coming at the end, and it is so good. I don't even think it's a particularly original thought when you think about the concept. You're watching it, but you've been watching this video, bits of it anyway, throughout the film. You see it in whole once, then you see bits of it, and it's a creepy video, and it's a creepy film. You have this sense of unsettling. And then it starts again, essentially. The TV turns back on. And this time she's coming up out of the well. And she's walking towards the camera, and she's got a hair in front of her face, and you don't know what's behind it. You can't see someone's face. You cannot know their intentions. And it has all of that built into it. And she comes right up to the screen, and you're feeling uneasy. And then her head just pops through the screen. And then, like you say, that weird kabuki walk or whatever it is, it's all backwards and disjointed, and it's like, oh, that's good, you know. Thanks for putting it on the front cover. No, it's missing in the American one, and also the bit where they zoom in on her eye in the original, and you're like, oh, that's creepy. But you've already seen her face, and then they show you her face in the remake. You've already seen her face, and then they show you, and it's like, no, it's not as creepy. And I don't understand that choice. That whole end scene, it probably detracts for me so much from the movie. Because like I say, I understand you have to remake it, you have to change things, you have to westernize a movie for Western audiences. It makes sense, you know. But those changes for the sake of changing, and it's not as good as the original. Like at some point, they would have been sat there watching that going, someone must have gone, it's not as good as the original. what have we done? Let's redo it. We've got 48 million. How much did that 48 million we got left? You know what I mean? Because I think if you just gave me a camera in an afternoon, I could fix this, you know, that sort of thing. I found that quite frustrating, you know what I mean?
It's the old phrase, less is more.
Yeah.
And again, not for it to be a cliche, but one of the things that I find most scary is the unknown, not knowing, as you said, not knowing the intentions of somebody because you can't see their face, not knowing bits and bobs about, you know, how it's happening or why it's happening. Those are the things that really kind of sit with you and really kind of leave you after you've watched the film. Those are the things that stays with you, along with those kind of very small snippet, you know, money shot images. And one of the things that I really, really like about the Japanese original is how it doesn't ever cop out and use cheap thrills. So one of my biggest pet peeves with horror, which is a surprise because it's in virtually every horror film ever made, is I hate jump scares because there's such an easy way to make somebody jump. There's no skill involved. All you've got to do is do something when they're not expecting it. It's so easy to do. And most horror films are just filled and littered and constantly just doing that.
Where do you stand? It's not a jump scare. It's like a jump scare. But my opinion, it's better. Is when it's like a slow jump, you know, when it's creepy, when you suddenly realise someone stood behind them, that sort of stuff.
That
I love that.
Yeah,
that unsettling feeling that there's been someone behind you.
Yeah.
You know, and they sort of come into focus. Those sort of things. It's not really a jump scare because they're not making you jump, but that feeling of uneasiness is so sad.
The Strangers. It's not a great film, but has brilliant shots of that. There's so many shots of just a fixed camera angle and you're watching, I think it's Liv Tyler in her kitchen and nothing's really happening apart from her making dinner or whatever, and you can only see it if you really look for it. All of a sudden you see there's a man wearing a mask cut out the window just standing there. That is
perfect.
You know, and I think that really does add to Ring because, as I say, I know it's a personal thing. Some people like that thing, but for me, it's a personal thing. There isn't really one jump scare in there. There's almost one where they do the flashes of the victims, but it prepares you for it. So it has a little bit of an underscore, and it prepares you for it, and then it shows you the image. So it's not just silence. And then big loud noise or big loud jumpy thing. I would say,
just going back to that, I don't know what it's called, that slow reveal jump scare. I don't know what it would be called. James Cameron is a master of this in Aliens. Superb stuff. Suddenly the wall's moving behind you, you know what I mean? And there's like those elements you're talking about, like the original versus the remake. Funnily enough, when I was watching the original, I was like, I thought their faces were much more distorted than that when they find them. Of course, it's in the remake, and I think they do that better. Also, really like the touches with the water in the remake. I'm sure I'm right in saying this. It doesn't happen in the original, where there's water on the floor and she's walking up. Because in that opening scene in the remake is much longer than the original. With the two girls, I watched it. I'm just winding you up. I didn't really, and all of that sort of stuff. That is much longer in the remake, and she walks upstairs, and there's water coming out from underneath the door. Really like those touches. Again, the fly thing was kind of cool as well, as she pulls the fly out of the videotape. I thought that was a nice touch. So totally elements within that create a sense of creepiness and uneasy without, like you say, resorting to just boo. You know, it's and I think there are elements within the remake that surpass the original, those particular pieces. But like you say, they're not reliant on cheap thrills at that point, you know.
Just going off of that, there's that use of water, I think is really good because it's set from, you know, it links back to that story where they have to go across the water to that island to get to the
In the original, the fishermen hate her. The fish, they can't catch any fish. In the remake, the horses drown themselves. Like you say, they're on an island and she's in a well. There's just water.
So having that water element in the remake is, as you say, it builds on it. It adds something different. It goes a step further without going too far and over the top. The fly thing really annoys me.
Does it?
I think it's
because they telegraph it quite.
It telegraphs.
It's coming because there's at one point she scratches it, and it's definitely on the screen. On the film. I think she does it again, and it's like you probably needed to chop that first one out.
Obviously, not if you've not seen it. But in the original, when you don't really expect her to come out of the TV. Apart from if you've got that DVD cover. But if you're going into it completely cold and you've not seen anything about it, you don't expect it to happen because at that point it's been contained within the figure in a video, and it's at arm's length, and that's part of the terror of it, is that all of a sudden, now she's here. All of the other stuff, it's just she looks like she's in the reflection on the TV, but she's not actually there.
It's all contained within the television and the phone. That's it. She's communicating from her grave. They then find her down the bottom of the well and give her a proper burial and all of peace. They bring peace to her is what they think they've done. So you think it's finished. She was communicating from the grave through the videotape and essentially through the phone above the log cabin. And that's that. And then, no, she's literally in the room with you, you know what I mean? And that moment is such a good moment. I will remember it the first time I saw it till the day I die. When she pops out, it's so good.
It's just expertly shot.
Yeah.
Expertly, the effects used are so good and so simple when you know how they're done. Yeah. It's just very much, again, less is more. Like, you don't need to use all that budget on, comparatively to the remake. It does too much. It's showing you far too much. It's doing a hell of a lot more. And actually all that does is mean that you're more desensitized to it, because why am I scared of this now? Because I've seen this done so much already. Okay, she ends up as you say, the faces in the remake are a lot better. There's a bit more kind of to it, and it looks
the death rictus.
It definitely looks,
I really liked it. The girl in the closet the first time you see it, I'm like, that's so good.
That's good. As opposed to in the original, it is just almost them just pulling faces.
In the remake, you don't see her. The father of her child, I forget the character's name in the remake. You don't see, she turns the chair round. You see her reaction to his face. He's also sat in a puddle of water in his chair. Right at the end of the film, you don't see his face, but you see Naomi Watts.
I think it depends on what version, because I know there's like extended. I can't remember what version I've seen, but I vaguely remember seeing it. So I reckon there is a version where you see his face, probably. But I think the theatrical release is as you say, just turns and you don't see it.
Yeah, you see her reaction.
That's good, because you don't know what she's looking at. Yeah. Your mind is the best thing. We've already seen
versions of it.
Your mind is the best thing for scaring you, because imagination can run wild. One of the things that I really like about both films, the thing that I think is really, really good, is that for the most part, it's not a horror film, it's a mystery film. For the most part.
They're solving a mystery.
That's the thing that I've always liked about J-horror, is that you have that initial spookiness, scariness of this thing, whatever it may be, has happened. And then it's trying to find out why and all the reasoning behind it, why it happens, as opposed to spooky thing happens, people die, and
it's a really good point.
For lack of a better term, end boss is defeated.
It's a really good point, because you don't actually know what it is they're trying to uncover. You know something's happened. It's a supernatural who did what, You know what I mean? Because it's not even a whodunit, because you don't know what's been done. You know obviously there's this videotape, and like they're slowly piecing together where the tape came from. And whilst they're working out where that tape comes from, you come to the conclusion that something bad has happened. You don't know what it is, and you don't know who did it, but it happened to this person, and it involves these people. The American one remake does a good job of, like, when they go to the island, is it the father? Is it the doctor? Was the whole island in on it? Because she says something like, "We're all better off with that girl gone." They don't over-labour the point, but she was saying things have been bad around here for a long time before the horses and all this sort of stuff. And it's almost like at that point you get into like a Wicker Man-esque conclusion in your mind where the whole village is in on it, you know, which is pretty good, you know. It's like, I find with the original, there's no fat on the original. It's a good hour and a half long, and they just get on with it. They don't.
Your perfect runtime for a film.
Favorite runtime for a film is an hour and a half, and I genuinely don't think the American one actually benefits from the extra half hour. I think you could chop it off. I think you could maybe go hour 40, and you're probably all right. And that's what's so nice about that, the original. And there's too much unexplained. You have to take too much on face value for a Western audience. Maybe we demand more explanation, and that's why it's a little bit longer, you know. Because there is just stuff you just accept. It's not explained. There's a bit when he's chasing I assume he's a fisherman, chasing the dude across the beach, and he's like, "She saw things, I see things," and it just feels so clumsy. He's got like a headlock or whatever it is he's doing, you know what I mean? Well, I've got those powers too, and like, I don't think you'd get away with that necessarily, as we discussed it, for a Western audience, where it would be a step too far. Like I say, you can accept the spooky kid instead. But that's one of the things I really like about the original, is there is no fat on it. They just get on with it, and it's not exactly, you couldn't call it a roller coaster of a movie because it's slow and it's tense, and the score on it is amazing. Jumps between its sort of traditional score and a sort of like string section that somehow sounds like flies. It's amazing when it cuts in. It's really good. It creates that sense of tension and weirdness, you know. I think one of the notes I wrote was like, it's almost like you're watching the score is almost like a sci-fi score. It's almost like space. It's so otherworldly. You could put this on a sort of thriller set in space, and it would fit. It's that otherworldly feeling of the score, you know, which adds to the tension. But they just, like I say, it's not a roller coaster of a movie. It doesn't start and you're going, but it doesn't ever stop. It just keeps moving all the way through. As like you say, it's this whodunit that they're trying to solve, who done what, that they're going through with all these supernatural elements mixed in. Which is kind of the perfect film. You know.
It's one of those things where it's very, very difficult for a remake or something that's based on a story to take things out. It's easier to add to, which is obviously why I think the remake is 25-30 minutes longer, and as you say, it doesn't really benefit. There's a lot more lulling about and kind of Naomi Watts' character arc and all this sort of stuff, it's kind of things that because for me all that does is makes me not resonate with that character, because all it does is make me go, well, not that
she's got it coming.
It's a very cynical view to have, but it's very difficult to care why these things are happening if somebody's not very likable. Mm-hmm. If they're likable, it's a lot easier to care.
Yeah, I mean, from the opening scene with Naomi Watts, her kids obviously waiting for her to pick her up from school, so you get this, well, she's a bad mum sort of feeling, and she's bawling someone out on the phone, "I'll poke your eyes out with pens," or whatever. I can't remember what she says, but like very abusive to someone who she works with down the phone. So you're set up not to like her. And you're like, oh, we know where this is going. We're going to like her by the end. Do we really need to do this? Could she not just be a nice working mum with a kid who falls? Because that's much what, I mean, to be fair, in the original, the child spends a lot of time alone.
There's some serious questions that need to be asked about
child
parenting.
abandonment going on. Like, yeah. There is a lot of that in the original, but you don't at any point hate or I don't even hate Naomi Watts' character. But do you know what I mean? There's no, you're not set up to hate the character.
Yeah,
in the original,
and for me, I don't know if that. Again, I could be making massive jumps. I don't know if that's more of a cultural thing, of that's more the style of parenting in that culture. I'm not sure. So for me, that's how I kind of looked at it. I was like, well, I find that a bit odd.
I think it's
wouldn't
supposed
do
to
that.
be odd. I think it's because they labour the point a few times in the original that the kid is conscious. Oh, he's used to being alone and all this sort of stuff. So I don't think it's a cultural thing. I think it is set up that way, but it's not so heavy-handed. Like outside of that, she's not rude to people. Do you know what I mean? She's not like I can't remember. Naomi Watts refers. You'd call me a controlling. Whatever I can't remember, but I think you're flaky, you think I'm over controlling and possessive or whatever it is. So it's constant like I'm not necessarily a good person, you know what I mean? She's like, would you call me gullible? Would you call me like easy to no, I'd never call you that and all that. It's just sort of like constant sort of reminding that she must be some way ruthless because she's successful, which I don't think would happen in a modern film. I don't think you'd get away with it. And watching it now, obviously, this film's 22 years old now. So it's, 21 and whatever it is. So things move on, but it was one of those things that stood out to me that probably wouldn't have when I first watched it because you're used to it. You're used to that trope. But watching it, I was like, it's so unnecessary. She doesn't need an arc where she comes around to being nice. It's not necessary for the film. And it's not really a decent enough representation of a working mum. Like, why has she got to be like that? But it's a small thing. It's a cultural thing. It's not cultural. It's a timing thing. It's of its age. It's a 20-year-old film, so you're going to bump up against things like this, aren't you? Things that were normal portrayals of characters then wouldn't fly now. You know,
there's always a tendency when we're doing these things, if there's a remake or if there's a reimagining or whatever you want to call it, and you watch them back to back or in quick succession, there's always a tendency to compare naturally. And so it's a lot easier to spot those things when you go, well, this happened in that happened in this, you know, and you weigh the two things
Was it
up.
necessary?
Yeah.
Was it better or was it a waste of time?
As you say, in the original, she's not rude to people. They touch on it slightly, but it's not really a character point. It's not a thing that has any real relevance. It's just an observation.
It just is.
Whereas she actually addresses it in the remake. Like when she goes to pick up her son, she's like, I know what you must think. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're late to pick up your son. Again, this is obviously a common occurrence. That's a natural thing to think, you know. And even when she's being told about her creepy kid with his creepy drawings, which is another thing that they, you know, add to and develop on it. The kid's a little bit creepy in the original, but he's not like obviously creepy, whereas the kid in the remake, he's like so obviously
dialed up to 10.
Like you can so tell that when he grows up he's going to be of somebody with some particular issues, because he's just it's so eerie, that character.
Well, you got to think 2002, you've had the Sixth Sense, so you've got the weird kid with the powers thing.
It's an old trope. But when she's being told about his drawing, she's like, it's like
he's just dealing.
It's just his way of dealing with it. God, you know. And it's like, well, these were drawn a couple of weeks ago before your cousin died.
It was 4 days before.
Or whatever it is, you know.
Because I think he says she told him she was going to die.
Yeah.
And you go, all right, that's starting to make a bit more sense.
Yeah.
It was after she saw the video.
Just another thing that adds to his creepiness. I feel bad because he's a small child and I'm really like digging him out for his performance. But
I'm sure he's a lovely human being, and it's just very good acting. You know? It is, to be fair, his performance is good at what he's doing. His performance is very good. There isn't a bad performance in the remake. I'm sure there isn't a bad performance in the original. It's harder to tell when you're watching a foreign language film how good a performances, how ropey a delivery is, because it's not your language. For the most part, I didn't spot anything that made me go, "Oh, that's terrible acting." And definitely didn't spot it in the remake. Like you say, the characters in the remake, where everyone's a character, is a bit over the top. But the performances all round are great. You know what I mean? Interestingly enough, obviously we've already been through it. Were there no other casting choices for the American version?
I didn't do massive amounts of looking into it, but I would have imagined, based on the fact that 2004 we had The Grudge, I would imagine that perhaps Sarah Michelle Gellar may have been in the running, or at
Neve
least
Campbell.
that kind of thing. Because as I said earlier, that Hollywood brought up the rights, and so
probably Nicole Kidman.
They had all of the licenses and everything to make them, so it's definitely a plan to go, we're not just going to do this one. This isn't just this is an American director, Gore Verbinski. He's not just, he really wants to remake this film. It's a case of it's a much more studio driven thing. So again, those one person who was actually considered for it in the Brian Cox character, obviously, is Bob Hoskins, because he seems to be for absolutely everything whenever we look at these things. I'm only joking, but he will do his Mario voice as well. Just going back to Samara or Sadako, that's actually based on, as I say, an old legendary Japanese ghost story based on the ghost of Onryu, which is usually a female and a ghost that manifests after dying in the grip of a powerful rage and materializes as a very physical spirit to seek vengeance on the living. And the Ju-On series was also inspired by that same legend, which is probably naturally why those two films are so similar. Obviously there's a bit more to it and there's slight differences, but naturally the comparisons are there and quite logical to make. You mentioned earlier the actual videotape within the film is I think much scarier in the original.
Yeah, definitely.
Again, hate having to use the same old phrase, but less is more. You see shorter part, it's much shorter.
Much creepier, less clear.
Yeah, I mean that's that's probably how it's kind of shot, where when you see it on the in the remake, it just cuts to the image of the video, if that makes sense, whereas in the original it's the camera close up to the TV, so it has that grainy effect because it's essentially just looking at it through a TV screen, whereas in the remake it just goes to the videotape image, in a cut. And that again, talking about small simplistic ways of filming, that was achieved by being shot on 35mm film. And again, as soon as you know that, you can go, of course it is. It looks like almost that Super 8 kind of style. It's very easy, but again, it's that thing. It's really interesting, like, linking it back to theatre, in the sense of one of the things that I got quite frustrated with when I was studying theatre was there was an element of just doing random things and putting it together and not really necessarily having to have a reason why, because the audience can make links that you haven't even thought of. Yeah. And it's a similar kind of thing here, like when he says, I think they say it in both films, where it's like, it's just some, hokey student film. Yeah. And it is so much like that, because it is just a collection of random things that aren't actually that scary, really. Yeah. But because in the context of how we're watching it, it's so terrifying. Although we said this about the Scream episode. When watching the scene where she's combing her hair, all I can think about is the scary movie thing. I put it on. Scary
movie has ruined a lot of horror movies.
And my wife was like chuckling to herself, and I'd kind of forgotten. I was like, this is a scary point. Why is she chuckling? And I was like, what are you laughing at? And she's like, just thinking of Scary Movie, and I'm like,
Yeah.
thanks for ruining it for me.
Yeah, it happened with Poltergeist as well.
Even in the US remake, which again doesn't happen in the original, when the TV is starting to have water come out of it. Just I always think of the line I think it might be Scary Movie 2, maybe 3.
I think it's the third.
Yes. Scary Movie 2's the haunted house one, isn't it? Where one of the characters goes, Sydney, the TV's leaking, like that, like just casually, So it's very difficult to kind of separate those two.
Yeah.
So
I
probably have ruined it for a lot of people now.
Yeah, Scary Movie has ruined a lot of horror movies, to be fair. I think with the original cassette versus the remake cassette, it's what you're not seeing. You're watching it going, hang on, she's looking at someone. Then there's a flash of this, then it moves. What am I looking at here? Why are they showing me? What is that? The ring, essentially, what you're led to believe is the ring, isn't it? It's the circle of light. What is that? Why is there a well? Oh, that's got to be connected. And it's that. The whole thing is what you're not seeing. And the problem with the remake one is they throw a lot more imagery in, and you're like, okay, it's too much now. It's too much. It was much easier when there was basically 4 or 5 different sections. There's like the combing, the letters, the ring itself, and then the well. The dude
standing on the little rock out in the sea.
Yeah, with a towel on his head.
He's just really ugly. That's the only reason.
Yeah, so there's like there's very few images, so it's easier for your mind to remember them, because you only see I think I'm right in saying you only see the film in whole once, and then you see bits. The cassette, sorry, in its entirety once, and you see it. I'm sure you just see sections of it throughout after that. I could be wrong, but it's easier for you to hold that in your mind because there's, like you say, there's less of it. Whereas they overdo it a touch. It's not completely rubbish, the American one, but they overdo it too much,
Yeah,
and it's clean and crisp.
I think it's that thing of
why did you draw the picture? That bit annoyed me.
It's just so hokey, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's too on the nose. I'm drawing you a picture, and then you see him. Oh, you forgot your picture, and he hands it to. It's just a little bit too on the nose. But that is then followed by the scene with the horse on the ferry, which is a great scene.
Yes,
it's an amazing scene. Yeah, it's a little bit Damien the Omen kind of vibe to it. You know what I mean? Like the giraffes, I think it is in the Omen, isn't it? But yeah, that is a good scene. Little bit ropey now, 20 years later. I remember them special effects looking amazing at the time. Not so much now.
It's that old thing, isn't it? CGI dates it. I think just on that image of the ring and why the film is called Ring, obviously it has that very obvious thing of it being it's the ring of the well, but there's actually a kind of deeper level to it, which is a lot more easier to pick up on from the books, because essentially it's the never-ending cycle of this kind of curse, or in the books it's actually a virus. It's a much more science fiction based film.
How do they square that circle then? It's a virus.
Yeah, so it's essentially because it's on.
Is there a spooky little girl in the book?
Down
the bottom of a well.
So I think, as I say,
but she had a virus.
There's no. It's like a computer virus.
That's funny you should say that, because I was like, if they made this film now, it'd have to be a cursed download. Yeah. Right? Because I literally went through.
Have you ever streamed a curse?
I literally went through all of the different technology from VHS to download. I was like, wouldn't be a DVD or a Blu-ray. Would it be a cursed memory stick?
It would be it would be such a problem, because you wouldn't be able to skip because you haven't paid for premium.
But making a copy and sharing it would take seconds, and it would be all over fucking social media.
How many copies do you want? Do 10? Do 10? Is that all right?
Like, because I was
centre wall. Is centre wall okay?
Because you see like, I haven't seen him for ages, but you used to see him on like Facebook. It'd be like, share this post or you won't have loads of money or something like that. I don't know, sort of weird cursey type things. But like, so because I did that thing when I was watching, like, if they remade it now, how would it be? Because it couldn't be a VHS tape. So I literally, like I said, I went through all of those different technologies, and I got to it would have to be a download. And then I'm like, could you even make this film now in that respect? Because it would be. I found this download and shared it with everyone I knew, who's their friends all saw. It's like, and then everyone died within a week.
Why did that person not die? Oh, it went to his spam folder. And it's interesting because, to be fair, they have like made a more modern version in like 2017, 2018. Rings. Like, again,
I'm gonna have to check it out now.
I can't remember what happened.
I'm gonna have to read.
I remember being excited for it, watching it, and going, literally nothing. You know?
I've got to say though, actually, that twist at the end of, you think we've dug her up, we found her.
Yeah.
They overlabored a point in the American version. It was like, no, she wanted to be heard. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be heard, sort of thing. Made her sleep above the horses and all that. The twist itself, where that's not what she wants. What she wants is for you the only reason you survived is because you made a copy. I thought it was a really good touch, because I didn't see it coming, really, the first time I watched it. I thought, oh, right, they've saved her. Because, like you say, it's a whodunit at that point.
Yeah. It's also,
and then you get to the end, she's like, I don't want saving. I want to kill people, or I want to be heard, and you have to make a copy. And then you get into that moral conundrum bit right at the end, and it's the whole film isn't based around it, but you get it thrown in as a nice little bonus at the end. Oh, sorry about that. I dropped an F-bomb a minute ago as well. But you get it thrown in. I'll see if I can edit it out. We'll work it out. You get thrown at the end of the moral conundrum of, should you make a copy of this and show it to anyone? There's a bit in the American thing where Brian Cox is like, how many copies of that? Is that the only copy of that? And she's like, no, I made a copy. And it's almost like he knows what the video is. It's never really explained. He steals the video from the dude in the video archives, or whatever that job was. I'm not sure. Blockbuster? Was that Blockbuster? It's been a while.
Sorry, no, you can't get this out. Why? Because you haven't got a membership.
Because he said, who had it out last? Brian. No.
Said exactly like that.
But so anyway, it's a nice touch. Is the moral conundrum at the end of, should you curse another person, or at least burdening them to have to curse? And it keeps going on, like you say, that continuation of the ring sort of thing. I thought it was a real nice touch. It's
much more ambiguous in the original.
What would you do?
Because all you see.
Doesn't she give it to her dad? She goes to see her granddad, right?
Yeah.
I've got a tape for you,
so
Dad.
The final scene is her driving to her granddad's
with the video player and the tape
recorder.
Which is weird when you think of all the people to show it to.
You know, so it's almost like, well, does she get to that point where she makes a copy?
But does she tell him?
Yeah, Dad, I've got a video for you. What is it?
Because I think she says it's for, and she says her son's name. It's important. It's for. Sorry, I forget his name.
Yes, actually. Sorry, just because I've seen the second one. Again, spoilers. In the second one, it starts with her dad being dead.
Really?
Yeah. So they find his body and go, this is a bit weird. This looks a little bit like what happened that time before. I've
definitely seen this. I've seen both the remake and the original Rings. I cannot remember. It was so long ago. What was interesting about it, when I went back to watch The Ring, I haven't seen it for many years. It started and I instantly went, oh yeah, I remember this now. Like, I couldn't remember. Like, obviously I know the plot points and the major things that happened throughout it, but the film itself was kind of gone from my memory. You know what I mean? And I started watching it. I was like, oh yeah, no, I remember this film. This is a good film. Yeah. And it was. I thoroughly enjoyed it, to be fair.
I think it's just a really interesting, thing to focus on. I think one of the things that they really were quite shrewd about is that, as I said earlier, the novels are much more science fiction based. And when I mentioned that the sequel was made at the same time by a different production company and different director, that was much more faithful to the series. And again, probably because it wasn't as well made as well, but probably why that didn't really take off. Essentially, loads of people went to see the original and were like, "This is great, let's watch the second one," and was like, "That was awful." So they went, "Okay, let's just kind of sweep that one under the carpet and forget about it, and let's get Hideo Nakata to come and make the sequel." And the sequel is, again, it's not quite as good. It's still pretty good. Again, it's a lot more chaotic, I would say, in its kind of in its delivery of things. There's much more going on. So it doesn't. Again, you said earlier about there's no fat on the original. There's a bit more fat and meat on the bone on this one, and it doesn't necessarily do it any favors.
I'm gonna have to watch it.
But again, still an interesting film. So what I think is something we've probably touched upon, but perhaps let's have a bit more of a discussion, is why do we think that J-horror has been so successful in Western cinema, or specifically Hollywood?
Yeah, like you said, I think we've already touched on it, where it's not necessarily just J-horror. It's Hollywood takes everything from everywhere. And Japanese cinema, long history. You know what I mean? From samurai films becoming cowboy and Western films, like, was it Magnificent Seven is Seven Samurai, and it goes on and on. There's tons of them. It likes of Quentin Tarantino is heavily influenced by Asian cinema in general, right? You know what I mean? And Hollywood just does it. If Hollywood does one thing well, it's assimilating and taking from other genres, you know what I mean? Like I say, German expressionism, French noir, those sort of things, all gets pulled in, the best bits of everything. And I suspect the reason, I mean, Hollywood is Hollywood, but we're from the West, so we're used to it. But so you don't really notice it. It's like that's the pinnacle of it, you know what I mean? Even like you go, there's like John Woo, like Replacement Killers, and that is such a strong influence on someone like Quentin Tarantino, and then essentially a lot of the 90s action movies becomes very Asian cinema based, right? John Woo comes over.
The Matrix is very much...
Oh, it's manga. It's a manga movie, isn't it? That's right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the list is endless. It just goes on. And J-horror, I think it came along at the right time. Horror was having a renaissance in the West, from Scream, Sixth Sense, those sort of films. Horror was, it was riding high in what would have been 98, so it came out in the remakes 2002. So it makes the timing is perfect. Plus, it's so atmospheric. I think, like we were saying before, when you watch Ring. I'm going to have to say The Ring, because if I say Ring, I just think of a doorbell.
Maybe that's where they should go next.
It's the next one. The haunted doorbell.
If you answer the door, you will be dead in 1 week.
Yeah. You pick up your phone and there's someone with the hair in front of their face. Yeah.
Oh, no thanks. I'm not opening the door. Can you just leave it on the porch, please? I think it would have
to be made by Amazon, though, right? Because Amazon own Ring doorbells. It'd be an Amazon Prime exclusive. Other streaming services are available. What was I saying? Oh yeah, that was it. So when you watch them, they are so otherworldly because it is from a different culture. It's even like if you go back to films like Tetsuo Iron Man and those sorts of things, and manga and all of those sorts of things, that Asian flavor of cinema, you are removed from it so far. I'm trying not to use the word exotic because I feel like that might be a problematic word to use, do you know what I mean? But it is not of your culture. So it has that extra feeling to it. And they're so well made. Like, visually, Ring is amazing to look at. The score is amazing. The concept's amazing. And the delivery is spot on. There is nothing wrong. There is no faults in that film. Now you can discuss like how it's received by Western sensibilities and stuff like that, and there are those cultural differences. But as as a piece of art, it's perfect for what it is. It has, and like those sort of J-horror movies have something about them that clearly cannot be replicated by Western cinema. You can do a good job of it, but it is not the same movie. And it can only exist in the format it exists in. Like, even, like, say you took a film like The Ring and made it in the UK, it's still not The Ring. It's not the Hollywood version. It's not big. We don't have 48 million budgets to spend on a horror movie. It would be stripped back and grittier and closer to the original in that respect, but it's still not the same film. I think if you look at the history of Japanese cinema, it's a long history of amazing filmmaking that the West have been pinching from since like the 1930s, you know what I mean? All the way back, you know.
Just jumping off of that, do we think that cinema, or specifically horror, is it cultural or is it skill or is it a mixture of the two, do we think?
How do you mean?
Well,
I'm not sure
I think there's so many things within Western cinema that are based in urban legends or cultural folklore and old stories around why these things are scary. You know, I think, as I said before, the Japanese has gone, you know, back to its kind of roots of sitting around a campfire and telling ghost stories. Yeah. You know, that's a very cultural type of thing that perhaps isn't as prevalent in more Western countries. We still do that, but in more kind of, let's say, Asian countries and in African countries where there are much more kind of campfire family kind of units that is there, you know, it's the equivalent of the dinner table, you know.
Yeah, I think telling ghost stories around campfires is a tradition every culture has. I think possibly more in America than necessarily over here because the weather's terrible and you ain't out camping that much. You know?
Sorry, I can't hear you over the rain. Yeah. Can you speak up a little bit,
please? I don't care about the man with the hook hand.
Yeah.
My socks are actually wet. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. There is always something. I mean, those sort of traditional stories have lasted for a reason. They obviously resonate and continue to resonate. So when something goes back and takes a little bit of something from the past and puts it in the present. He said the future, put it in the present, and when it works, it's those simplistic stories, like, you know, the tale of the hook on the hand on the back of the car, the escaped from asylum thing. All of those sort of they resonate with generation after generation, and they've lasted 100, 200 years. Because sometimes, like a simple, spooky story is the best. Do you know what I mean? And like we say, this movie is an update of the haunted artifact movie, the cursed. It could just as easily be the Mummy's curse. You took something from the Mummy's temple, but in this case, it was a videotape. You know what I mean? It's those sort of things. But those traditional, something you don't understand is coming for you. What do you do? It's like I think you say often, great movies pose questions. So this movie poses a question. You are now cursed. You have 7 days to find out how to save yourself. How would you do that? How do you survive this? So most horror movies are, how do you survive? And then, as we're saying, at the end, it poses one more moral dilemma at the end. Would you forward the tape on? Would you press send on the download?
I'd probably blind copy people in.
I'd probably just forget to do it. I'd probably be about to do it.
So obviously we've spoken probably just as much about the US film as the Japanese film. And with that in mind, are there, or do we think there are any US remakes of Japanese horrors that are better than the original? Are there any that spring to mind?
No, not I can think of off the top of my head. They like we've said repeatedly throughout this, there's nothing wrong with paying for the intellectual property. I hope at that point, you hope the original writers and screenplay and directors and all of those people got their money, because that's not always the case either. Who knows what contracts they signed? May have signed all of their rights away to the studios, is often the case. But there's nothing wrong with, as we said, there's nothing wrong with buying an intellectual property and changing it for a Western audience. It would be no weirder than that there's Asian or foreign cinema remakes of Western films. It's just a thing that happens, you know. I can't think. Obviously, like we've already touched on The Grudge. Hunger Games was based on a book, but it's essentially battle royale. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't actually think of that many. So I certainly can't think of any that are better. What about you?
I don't think it has the same name. So it's called Shutter. Is it called Shutter? I think it's called Shutter.
There is a movie called Shutter.
Yeah. It's a remake of, not Japanese horror, but an Indonesian film, I think, of the same name. And again, that's very much based in those kind of. So it stars Joshua Jackson, and he moves to Japan with his wife after getting a job out there, and he's a photographer, and things start appearing in the photos and the images.
I'm sure I've seen this film.
Yeah, so that's based on an Indonesian film, which I think the remake is slightly better.
Have you seen both versions?
I have seen both versions. I think the remake, again, maybe it's because I saw the remake first. Maybe it's because the characters not the characters, but the actors I can kind of, I do quite like Joshua Jackson. I think he's quite a good actor.
I've definitely seen that movie, 100%.
It seems like a movie you would have seen.
I've definitely seen it.
I think the remake is it's not to the same standard as Ring or The Ring. I think it's part of that genre, and I think it's quite good.
Yeah.
So I think probably that one. There aren't many that I can. Well, I don't think there are any others that I can think of where I go, oh, you need to see the US remake because that's better.
I mean, the most recent and obvious one, I think I'm right in saying this, would be Ghost in the Shell, right?
That's right. Yeah, and
I've never seen it though, so
it wasn't very well received.
But I don't think they went about it particularly in the right way.
Well, it's live action, isn't it? So that's why it's a bit different.
There's nothing wrong with taking an intellectual property and remaking it. But I think, if I'm right, in Ghost in the Shell, the character was westernized.
Yes.
Which I think is where you run into problems with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think where the whole cast is westernized.
The whole cast is westernized.
But it's set, I think, still in Japan.
Yeah, and I think that's that whitewashing, I think they call it, don't they?
Yeah, whereas
you're gonna run into problems with that sort of thing, you know what I mean? Whereas
that's what's quite interesting about Shutter is that both versions have a foreigner going to obviously in the original Indonesia and in the remake to Japan. So they're very
that in itself is a narrative tool, because the fish out of water, something bad is happening to you and you don't really know where you are, kind of thing. Everything is foreign and strange to you, and strange things are happening, is a great tool to use in a film.
It's very similar to The Ring, because obviously The Ring has those pictures, those spirit photos, and it's very, very that's the crux of the whole film is about. That's how they notice that all these pictures are being maybe it's just a dodgy lens, and then you realise it's on every photo.
I've definitely seen it.
But I don't think there were much more. But
it's a great narrative tool to ramp up the isolation, the feeling of isolation for a character, is to put them in a foreign place, especially a very foreign place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount of difference between France and England, really. We're right next to each other, you know. But if you take Western and put them into a very foreign place where they're not even using their alphabet, that sort of thing, where that sense of isolation, because you now need help, how do you go about getting help? It's a good narrative tool. I think that kind of makes sense in that respect. Like I said, I haven't seen Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in Michelle.
It's the Yorkshire version. Have you seen Ghost in Michelle?
It's just that I was talking to her and now I'm not.
Yeah, Michelle, she's being possessed by ghost.
Are you still ghosting Michelle? No, I'm not talking to her no more.
Don't start.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think, like we've already said, it's pulling of influences. Like Star Wars, I think we already mentioned it. Is all Asian cinema in there, you know, samurai films, all of that sort of stuff. I think if you pick apart the threads of what Star Wars is made of, it's predominantly Asian cinema, all of those bits and bobs. I think even the Force and all of those sort of things. I think that's what we do best. As for straight up remakes, I honestly I couldn't say. I don't know.
Yeah, the only other one I can think of, but I haven't seen the counterpart to it, is Mirrors with Kiefer Sutherland. It's quite a good little film. Again, very similar thing. It's about, you know, a ghost trapped in a mirror.
Is he like a security guard?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, yeah. So actually, I seem to recall it's good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
People keep killing themselves in the mirror.
Yes.
Like their reflections are trying to kill them or something.
Yeah,
that's right. It's a good movie, yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't seen the counterpart to that, so I wouldn't be able to say if it's better or...
Oh, right.
You know. So that brings us on quite nicely. I think we've kind of covered all the things, really. We've spoken about the legacy of it. Obviously, I think it's, as we said earlier, another development from the Poltergeist legacy, which we will cover in another episode. I think, is there anything else, you know, that we feel we need to talk about in either version?
I think we got it.
Okie dokie.
For the first time ever, and against the advice of top industry executives, WXX Productions brings you all your favourite Hollywood stars' dating videos. From Sylvester Stallone.
I'm just looking for my Adrian to, help me get to the last round, for like moonlit strolls, ice rinks, meat factories, Russian ballet,
Is your favourite movie stars as you've never seen them before, unfiltered, unedited, and looking for love. When love comes a-calling, Hollywood needs a hero. Some might say an action hero.
Yeah, come on, do it. Date me now. I'm right here. Come on, do it. Date me now.
That's Hollywood Love Tapes from WXX Productions.
So it's that horrible time again where we have to say goodbye for this week. Remember to like, follow and shout from the rooftops. And if you're feeling super saucy, drop us a comment on any of our socials. We hope you've enjoyed our foray into Japanese horror cinema as much as we've enjoyed digging. Until next time, good morning, good afternoon, good evening and good night. It will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 boom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll back and you're talking. When we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
Right. Good job I observed that well, wasn't it? Please, Jim, sort your chair out. It's because